It's been about a year since my last video, and a lot has happened, both in my personal life with the loss of one of my aunts, a job change, as well as in the world. In the United States, we had our midterm elections. There's been that conflict with Russia and Ukraine that we've been witnessing, and most recently, the passing of the Queen of England. I felt for a long time that we were about to enter the acceleration mode in terms of end time prophecy in the timeline. But given the events of the last several weeks, I've had to rethink this position. I believe we are not just about to enter acceleration mode, I believe we're smack dab in the middle of it. For the last several months, I've witnessed people leave the land of the living for whom I questioned if they were ready for eternity. Some of these people were public figures, while others were more personal to me and were in my family. Losing someone that you know is not ready to meet their maker is particularly heartbreaking in a way that I cannot fully articulate. I often wonder if they passed with all the necessary tests put before them before breathing their last. I know this isn't a popular topic, especially amongst Christians, but I do believe that we are all tested over the course of our lives, and much of this testing is under the direction of the Most High God. Like it or not, this is scriptural. There's a pattern of testing that every figure in the Bible has gone through before going to the next level or flat out failing. In the past, when I've brought up the subject of the Most High testing his people, I've gotten pushback from some Christians who think the idea is audacious, even blasphemous. But the scriptures are clear. Whether we want to accept it or not, we are indeed being tested, and it's important to be ready for the test. So when it comes upon you, you don't fail it. And this testing is my topic for today. Before graduating to the next level, we must all be tested, and there's no getting away from this. Now, most of you have no problem with this concept of testing when it comes to things the natural in our everyday lives, but many struggle with this when it comes to spiritual matters. Let's look at it from the natural perspective. Before you can go to the next grade in school, if you're in elementary school or middle school, high school, there are several tests that you must pass. You're tested for your knowledge of a certain subject, say it's a basic math equation, algebra or chemistry. And based on your answers to the questions on the tests you're given, you either get a good passing grade or a average grade or a failing grade. On the job, if you're, in the workplace, in the workforce, you usually have to pass tests through the course of business that could be an informal test or an actual formalized test. And this happens before you're promoted. If were your assignments completed on time and on budget, you passed a test. You pleased the client, and as a result, they upped the budget for your company, they bought products from your company, big ticket items, you passed the test. You proactively won new customers and convinced them to buy products from the company where you work from. You passed the test. Now, on the flip side, let's say you missed a deadline on your job. You cost the company to lose money. You failed the test. You had an entanglement with a customer. They registered a complaint resulting in you being reprimanded or even fired. You failed the test. You didn't show up to the job a few times, resulting in balls being dropped. You failed the test. Now let's look at athletics. Before someone is accepted on a sports team, and I'm talking professional sports here, they first have to pass the test of training camp and tryouts. Now, depending on how you do at tryouts, let's say it's football tryouts, you either make the team, you pass the test, or you're cut from the team, you fail the test. So hopefully these examples demonstrate for you how you're being tested regularly in life and in the natural world. Testing is demonstrated all throughout the Holy Bible, leading all the way up to end-time testing. Unfortunately, according to Scripture, most are going to fail this test. I believe this failure comes as a direct result from the teaching conditions many of us received in the traditional church that teaches us that all we have to do is believe, say a few words, and we're good. Just believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you're saved. But rarely is anything said about living a life that demonstrates any real changes that you're saved. And don't get me started on keeping the commandments of the Most High, as most of people coming out of the traditional churches are convinced that this was done away with and they can live any way they please as long as they believe they're okay and their hearts they believe they're accepted. Live your life however you want. Love your neighbors, you love yourself. Just believe in and you're in. Keeping the commandments of the Most High is another subject altogether that I do plan to cover in the future. But for today, I'm going to focus on the spiritual testing that we're going to all go through. So as I mentioned, everything in life has a testing element baked into it. In the natural world, we're constantly being tested and conditioned to expect to be tested before any significant promotion. Now, I've already touched on school, and this includes higher education, university, postgraduate, team sports, jobs. Nobody is promoted without having first proven himself or herself. But unfortunately, the traditional church has taught and conditioned many, many Christians to expect the ultimate promotion into heaven, and all they have to do is say a few words and they're in. This is false teaching, and unfortunately, many have fallen for it. The reality is that the natural world mimics the spirit world. And just as we have to pass tests in order to be promoted to the next level in our natural world, the same goes for spiritual promotions, including that ultimate one. So here's a couple of examples from the Old Testament of testing that can be found in the book of Genesis. So let's start with the story of Adam and Eve. In my teenage years, when I was early in my walk with the Most High, I often wondered why he would place the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden and then tell Adam and Eve not to eat from it, when human nature dictates that the first human couple would eventually eat from the tree regardless of the threat of death, just because they were told not to eat from the tree. I always thought, if the Most High really expected Adam and Eve to abstain from eating from the forbidden tree, why wouldn't he just keep the tree under lock and key and out of their reach? But as I matured and I began understanding the necessity for testing and how it's there to prove something, the worth of something, like, as I mentioned, when you're in school, testing a math student for their knowledge of the application of formulas before they go to higher levels of math. On the job, a supervisor has to prove his ability to lead a group before he becomes manager. And of course, the Most High had to test the first man and first woman's loyalty towards him and his rules before granting them even more power and authority over the earth. So we all know the story of Adam and Eve. They failed the test miserably, and the entire human race is suffering as a consequence of their disobedience. Now let's move along to the story of Abraham and Isaac. So Abraham was considered to be a friend of the Most High, and he had received a promise of a son through whom Abraham's descendants would be numerous like the grains of sand. Years later, even decades had gone by since Abraham first received this promise, and when he was 100 years old, Abraham and his wife Sarah, who at the time was 90 years old, finally received the promised child, Isaac, whom they both absolutely adored. So fast forward a few years, Abraham was instructed by the Most High to take his beloved son Isaac and sacrifice him. Abraham followed all the steps necessary for a sacrifice, an animal sacrifice. He and his servants and Isaac went up to the place where he had been instructed to perform this sacrifice, and when the time came, Abraham actually bound Isaac to the altar. He took a dagger, and he was about to do the unthinkable. But before plunging the dagger into his son's chest, the Most High called out to Abraham to stop and said to Abraham that he now realized that Abraham was fully obedient and was willing to make the supreme sacrifice of his beloved son. Moments later, a ram appeared in a thicket, and Abraham used the ram as a sacrifice instead of Isaac, and he made the sacrifice to the Most High, under the direction of the Most High. Now, in this instance, Abraham was given the ultimate test. Would he sacrifice the son that he and his wife Sarah had longed for years, decades, and even to have? Or would he obey the Most High and pass the test, or would he fail it? Now, we all know the story. Abraham passed this test with flying colors, and the fulfillment of the promise of Abraham's seed being as numerous as sand came to pass. And I'm going to give one more example. This one coming also from the book of Genesis, and we're looking at the story of Joseph. This is the son of Jacob, who was later renamed Israel. Joseph was the favorite son of his father Jacob. His older brothers were insanely jealous of their younger brother and had much hatred and smoke for him. When an opportunity presented itself to rid themselves of their brother Joseph by selling him to the Ishmaelites, his 10 brothers took the opportunity, and later Joseph was sold to the Ishmaelites and ended up being sold to Potiphar. It wasn't long before Joseph, who at the time of this was roughly 18 years old, he began to excel in his work for Potiphar, and his master noticed his skillful work. Joseph was promoted to head servant over Potiphar's household. In addition to this, Potiphar's wife, who isn't named in the book of Genesis, but the book of Jasher reveals Potiphar's wife's name, and it's Zelicah, with a Z. Both Genesis and Jasher describe Joseph as comely. In other words, he was really, really good looking. Joseph was hot. Zelicah was completely mesmerized by the attractive teenager, Joseph, and began flirting with him and sexually propositioning him. According to the book of Jasher, at one point, Zelicah became so enamored with Joseph and desirous of him that she became physically ill. Joseph had been taught the ways of the Most High, taught the commandments by his father, Jacob, and was obedient to the God of his father. He flat out refused Zelicah's sexual advances. Now, the woman's persistence continued until one day she became so emboldened that she yanked off Joseph's tunic, his little thing that he wore around his waist, in his private parts, in an attempt to force him to have a sexual liaison with her. Joseph didn't take the bait, but instead he took off running, leaving his tunic in her hands. Zelicah felt jilted and angry, but instead of just giving up in defeat, she spun a lie for her husband and accused Joseph of making sexual advances towards her. She presented Joseph's tunic in her hands as evidence to her husband that she had fought off Joseph's advances. Potiphar, as you can imagine, was furious. He wasn't there, he didn't see this, but just the idea that this servant had done this to his wife, he just was so angry he threw Joseph in prison. Years later, while being falsely imprisoned, Joseph interpreted a couple of dreams of his fellow inmates and eventually earned an audience with the king of Egypt called Pharaoh, and interpreted a dream for Pharaoh, which led to a huge, huge promotion for Joseph to the second command in all of Egypt. Joseph's reward for his refusal of committing an adulterous act with his master's wife was definitely a passing of a test. But oddly, his reward for doing the right thing was delayed for a few years before he was finally promoted for his faithfulness. I believe that the testing of Joseph was delivered in a multi-pronged way, delivered in several stages. Joseph passing at each stage led all the way up to an audience with Pharaoh, which led to his huge promotion to second in command in all the land. Now, these 3 examples of testing from the book of Genesis that I covered today are just scratching the surface. They're a mere sampling of people in the Bible who were tested before they went to the next level. Not all of the tests were easily passed, but some might seem like a no-brainer. Like in the example that I gave of Adam and Eve, that seemed like a fairly easy to test, and yet it was miserably failed. And the example with Abraham and Isaac, that was a lot tougher of a test. What I didn't go over, though, before that testing happened, there was a period of testing with Sarah and Abraham that they both failed and jumped the gun when Sarah was encouraging Abraham to have a child with her maid Hagar, when it looked like Sarah was too old and unable to have a baby. This was their attempt to help out the Most High, and it wasn't necessary. And their stumbling when it came to this test of waiting on the Most High for the baby, even though Sarah had very likely passed her time of stopped having her period, and realize that, hey, this is looking like the Most High won't be able to have us have this baby. But he didn't need their help. And them failing this part of the test of waiting caused a lot of friction between Sarah, Hagar, Abraham, and innocent child Ishmael, who he didn't have anything to do with this. He was innocent and he was hurt by this as well. In the story of Joseph, if it seems to you like Joseph spent an unduly amount of time in prison for what, someone who made the right decision to flee his master's brazen, advances towards him, the answers for why he spent the extra time to the tune of like 2 more years in prison is not found in the book of Genesis. But according to the book of Jasher, and I'm looking at chapter 46, verse 19, the Most High caused Joseph to remain imprisoned for the extra time as punishment because Joseph had trusted in man to get him out of prison instead of trusting in the Most High. But in the end, Joseph stopped trying to maneuver his way out of his circumstances, and instead he started working, busying himself there in the prison as he waited for the Most High. He finally passed the test. Now, there's a lot more that I can say about how we are being tested and how we must be prepared in this day and age in which we're living for the ultimate test that is coming to us in the near future. And it's coming to every man, woman, and child as we make our way through the prophetic timeline. It's important to think how we approach spiritual matters and make sure we're prepared for the test that is coming our way. I'm going to close this video in a short prayer. Father Yah, thank you for the examples of testing that we're all going to go through, that you have detailed throughout your Holy Scriptures, highlighting the 3 samples that we talked about today. We all understand testing as it relates to natural things, but many fail or refuse to believe that testing extends to our spiritual areas and what you expect from us. Please change our hearts and minds to reflect what is in your perfect will. Wherever we are in our walk with you, help every listener within the sound of my voice to perform a reset within themselves to make sure they are aligned with your perfect will. Please retrain us like an athlete trains in wind sprints and weights, and healthy diet to make sure that we're in optimal form. Help me and every listener to condition our character and our minds to walk with you so we are in top form and fully prepared for when your son Yahushua returns for his bride. Please send your Holy Spirit to be our regulator and trainer to rid ourselves of bad and sinful behavior that is displeasing to you, while building right behavior and habits that are pleasing to you. I ask all of these things in your Son Yahushua's name. Thank you for listening. The Most High is not finished with this topic about how to be prepared for the test, the big test that's coming your way. And I plan to put out more videos in the coming weeks to drill much deeper into this topic. So when the time of your testing, including that big test, comes your way, you'll be ready. Please like and share this video and subscribe to this channel. And don't forget to click the notification bell to make sure you receive alerts when I upload a video. Until next time, be open to change if it will lead you to something positive, especially if it makes you uncomfortable.